Nationwide protests over police brutality.
Over the last 10 years, sea levels have risen at an alarming rate.
Western wildfires about the size of New Jersey.
Devastating unemployment nationwide.
Have I done a good job?
2,777 COVID deaths.
Have I done a good job?
With faith in America and in each other, let us be the nation that we know we can be.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Democracy on the Brink. I'm your host, Santita Jackson, and it's a joy to be with you once again. Let me thank you for the feedback that you gave us on our last show. We learned a lot from you, and we hope that you learned a lot from us. What we're trying to do here is give a voice to the unvoiced and to mainstream marginalized people and their issues. And so please keep that feedback coming because we want to serve you. Whether we are expressing the aspirations of the forgotten rural voter or showing the challenges facing the Southern voter who's been suppressed or the urban voter who's been suppressed, we want all of these voices and more to have a platform here, which brings us to Black women and Black women's emerging political power, leading the way for all women. Indeed, Black women were the firewall for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And for 2 consecutive presidential cycles, Black women outvoted every demographic group and gender. Why? Well, 2 of our guests today are going to show us why and how. Nina Turner, hello somebody. Yes, that Nina Turner, former state senator Nina Turner, the co-chair, the national co-chair of the Bernie Sanders for President campaign. This former state senator has become a firebrand of the left, of the progressive political movement. And now she's running for Congress herself, hoping to take over Marcia Fudge's seat, who has been nominated to be the Secretary of HUD. What could she bring to that rural, urban, and suburban community? We're going to find out. And Glynda Carr has founded a PAC that is much like Emily's List, but for Black women, Black progressive women, higher heights, taking Black women to higher heights. What is she doing? How is she doing it? How is she reaching out and funding these women who don't have money, but who have a whole lot to say? We're going to find out from these women, and we're going to also have another conversation about how we can create intersectionality, how we can bridge the divide. We are not so much divided, as I shared with you the last time, as we are disconnected. If we start talking to each other, boy, what a difference we can make. And that is what this show is about. Democracy on the Brink. Democracy on the Brink. We are on the brink of great things. So stay tuned. I think you're going to enjoy the show. I'd like to welcome a woman for whom I have great respect and admiration, a very, very dear friend. I'm proud to call her that. Former state senator Nina Turner. Now she's doing something else. The former co-chair of the 2016 and 2020 Bernie Sanders for President campaigns, former state senator. She has worked in city government. She really, one of the things that I admire the most about her is that she has always worked on the ground and she makes it plain. Nina Turner, welcome to Democracy on the Brink.
SJ, it's great to join you. So excited. Free Speech TV, baby. I'm glad to be here.
I'm loving it all. Well, look, I'm excited to have you because I understand you have been, I think, coming out of a campaign, these presidential campaigns. It can be they're exhilarating, and coming out of them can be rather deflating, as we both know.
Well, from experience as well.
Well, we understand that, but that you're always looking. I think when you come from these mission-driven campaigns, you're looking for ways to serve. And that's something that I've lovingly needled you about. Like, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do next?
Yes.
And so what are you doing next?
Well, I am running for the Congressional District, Ohio 11th. My current Congresswoman, Marcia Fudge, has gotten a nomination by President-elect Biden to be the HUD secretary. So many congratulations to her on that. So that leaves open the opportunity to run for that seat, and I am running.
Why are you running for this seat? It seems to me to be a very, very exciting time for young progressives in particular to go in, or young or old, for a progressive to go into the House of Representatives, because you won't be alone.
That's right.
It seems to me that you'd be enlarging the squad. And that's very interesting in this time in which centrists have tried to paint all of these Democratic losses as progressives' fault, when it's actually the progressives who won. Cori Bush, was it Jamal?
Jones.
That's right. I mean,
Yeah.
so
Bowman.
Jamal Bowman out of New York. I mean, so it's like, so what would you like to do when you get there? I mean, because I think that, wow, making the squad get bigger would be incredible.
Not just even expanding the squad, but there is a progressive caucus in the House of Representatives. And so that would be a beautiful thing too. And I see my role primarily serving the interests of my district, no doubt, and what the people of my district need, what they are interested in. Number one, we need COVID relief. And we have talked a lot about that over the weeks, SJ, about the fact that the failings of the federal government in particular, and now we know that they have come up with a deal, but that deal is lacking. I'm trying to contain myself on that, but $600, even less than what the first stimulus was, no expansion of the unemployment benefits. I mean, you name it, people are really suffering intently.
Yes.
And so dealing with that kind of suffering in my district, as in all districts and states across this country, this is not just a national pandemic, but a global pandemic. So that I care a lot about making sure people have health care. And SJ, this moment proves, it has shown us, for people who did not believe, who didn't quite understand it, I do hope that they understand it and get it now, that far too many people, the poor, the working poor, and the barely middle class, can barely make it. They were barely making it before. Leave no doubt that they're not making it right now. And we have to bring people relief. And having universal health care is one way of many ways to actually do just that. It is immoral for folks not to have health care. The commodification of health care right now is wrong. And then having health care linked to a job, because so many people have lost their jobs.
Do you think this would be an interesting opportunity to bring even more synergy between the Congressional Black Caucus and the Progressive Caucus?
I do. Oh my, do I? I'm beaming from you asking me that question, because the roots of our community, SJ, and you know this, the roots, I'm talking about the essence, the journey, the struggle, everything that has made us who and what we are culturally as a people is wrapped in progressivism. Call it freedom fighting, call it liberation, whatever you call it. The African-American community is at the center of that historically, because it doesn't get more progressive. You don't become more of a freedom fighter or a liberator than fighting for your very freedom, literally, across generations, and that of your children and your children's children, bumping up against the status quo all the way. Because if it were left up to the status quo centuries ago, we would still be in shackles and chains. And so I'm going back that far to say that it was the sheer determination and the fight of our ancestors that got us to where we are right now. And if people really kind of peel back the layers, they were fighting against a system that labeled them chattel. And they could not sit there and say, you know, we're just gonna go with the flow and they'll get to it by and by. Oh no, there were freedom fighters out there pushing until where we are today. And we know we have more pushing to do. So I said all that to say that Black folks in America are the ultimate liberators, the ultimate progressives, the ultimate freedom fighters. And so, yes, to see the Black caucus itself and the progressive caucus come together, baby, they're not ready for that, SJ. Not ready.
Well, you know, look at the history. When you look at a John Conyers, really, he and Augustus Hawkins have been like the fathers. The day after Dr. King was murdered, was assassinated. Dr. King, when he was killed, he was the most unpopular man in America, had a more than 70% disapproval rating in the white community, more than 55% disapproval rating in the Black community. He went on the floor of the Congress and called for his birthday to become a national holiday. That's the progressive nature of the Black caucus. But at the same time, Nina, as you well know, you and I are both church girls.
Yes, we are.
Socially, African Americans are very conservative. And so the progressive space can sometimes be an uneasy space for African Americans, particularly older, I would even say middle-aged African Americans, to occupy, because it's, you know, it can be a little, I think that was one of the challenges that we saw that Senator Sanders faced. And, you know, really, because progressive space doesn't really understand caste as much as they understand class. And I just think that you've got your work cut out for you, but I think that you can do it. I mean, what does your district look like?
I'm up
Because,
for
you know,
that.
in the Midwest, we farm and we're urban and we're everything in between and outside of that, right?
Ohio is an agricultural state, so I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that up. You know, when I ran for Secretary of State in 2014 as the Democratic nominee, and I put that out there because, you know, there are folks out there, she's not a real Democrat. What does it mean to be a real Democrat? A real Democrat is a freedom fighter, somebody that will stand up and speak the truth, even if that truth somehow reveal some things about our own party, not doing a favor to the party or to progress to just go along to get along. I am not and never will be a go along to get along kind of person. And so, yes, my district is diverse. It is diverse economically, racially, socially, politically. It's a Democratic stronghold in that regard, but it is a very diverse district, and it is very much similar because half of my Senate district, half of my Senate district was the 11th congressional district before redistricting took place in 2010. And so my Senate district itself is not a majority minority district. It is a district that is mixed with people from all walks of life, and that's religious, sexual orientation, gender, you name it. It is mixed. So I am accustomed to service in a district that is diverse in every single stretch of the imagination.
Well, let's make it plain. What can a progressive from Ohio take to Congress? I mean, and what can you bring back from Washington? I mean, what are you hoping to say on the floor? What are you hoping to represent? Because you won't be just representing Ohio, for example, you know, because you've come to mean a lot to a lot of people in the progressive space and just nationally. I think just as a woman, as a Black woman, as a woman of color, I mean, you just cover a lot of bases. And we're just in a time in which we want some straight talk, which is what you do.
We do.
Congress, do you feel that you'll be constricted at all, or?
No, and I recognize like the import of what you're saying. I kind of I meditate on that. You and I both are definitely church girls. I talk to God about that. I do understand what my positioning in the universe is, how God has blessed me over the last few years to be able to carry my district, my city. I'm a Cleveland girl, to be able to carry my people, meaning my district and my city, with me everywhere that I've ever gone across this country, and to bring that back to bear for this district. So I will be a big voice when it comes to healthcare, to canceling student debt. I understand the burden that people still face. I'm still paying off student debt, Sister SJ. I think you are too. You and I have talked about, you know.
Well, you know, I was fortunate. I went to school where I could afford to go. I had a full scholarship.
Okay.
And wait a minute, no, that's what my mother said. She said, each one of you will go where you can afford to go. So everybody got scholarships to school. Seriously. Because my parents had 5 kids in school at one time.
Yeah, that's a lot. A lot of other parents face the same, you know, putting people back to work, $15 an hour minimum wage. That is vitally important. 70% of this economy is a consumer-based economy. And as we're seeing that COVID is revealing the fistures in the system that were already there. They're not brand new. So people who want to act like they didn't know that the wages of folks is not keeping up with inflation. No, you knew You just didn't want to deal with it. And Sister SJ, the opportunity, the promise and the problem of COVID is for us to do a new thing and to do it a new way and to do it deeper and to have those truthful conversations about the economic rigging of the system, the social rigging of the system. God knows in the criminal justice area, rigged from generation. We got to deal with that. It's not just policing. It's not just law enforcement. It's who are the judges? Who are the prosecutors? What are the rules? What are the collateral sanctions that even when people get out of prison, there's certain jobs across the country, depending on the state, that they can't even get. We have a real opportunity here to reimagine, as Professor Eddie Glaude always talks about, how we do things in this country and to make sure that we are lifting the least of these, our sisters and brothers. So when people see me passionate or they hear me passionate, or it might be something that they didn't like the way I phrased it, I am always carrying with me the folks who are the most marginalized and downtrodden. And yes, at times it does make me angry to have millions of people who don't have food. You should be angry to know that there are millions of evictions pending. Some people have already been evicted. Some people haven't been evicted yet, but they right there on the cusp. That should make you angry. To know that it has taken the Congress this long, I'm talking about Republicans, Democrats, and that Trump administration, this long, SJ. Here we are, December. Right before Christmas, those of us who celebrate this holiday, what would Jesus do? He wouldn't be doing what some of these folks are doing. Lord, I almost called them some names. Pray for me. What I am saying is that on some of these issues, if people are not mad, if they're not angry, something is wrong with them, not me. And so all the pearl clutching and, she didn't frame it right and no, people are suffering and they need somebody to be mad as hell, and then to do something with that. It's not enough just to be angry, but what are the action steps? And I have been actively engaged, SJ, as you and I both know, and people know in this country, all across this country, lifting people and pushing, whether it's running, whether it's people organizing. We must make a demand, as Brother Frederick Douglass said that we must do.
Absolutely.
Power concedes nothing without a demand, and then we got to have some consequences for that demand. So I am going to Congress in service of my district, by extension, this state, and by extension, as you laid out, Sister SJ, this nation.
I think people need to understand, before you go, your passion, you've been like a mother twice. You lost your mother when you were very young, when she was very young, and you took over the care for your children. I mean, for your siblings, and you became a mother, and then you married and became a mother again. So you see, you really look at this, I'd say, from the ground up, and really from the perspective of family, because you, number one, had to hold your family together, and then you had to go and build one.
Through pain, too. My mother died at 42. I was in my early 20s. Who was expecting that? I'm the oldest of 7 children. And not only did she die, she didn't have a life insurance policy. She died on the system of welfare. She had no money in the bank. My mother was the custodial parent. I'm fortunate to still have my dad here with me. He is a wonderful dad. They got married, they got divorced. Life happens. It didn't work out. But she was the custodial parent. She had to wipe the runny noses and cry herself to sleep at night because she couldn't afford gifts for 7 children or times when we didn't have food. So yes, I'm angry. Because I am trying to I'm trying to help to ameliorate. There are things in this country, this hegemon nation, the basics that people should at least have. And yes, it is born from my experience. And then also all of the people that I've had the opportunity to meet along this journey from all across this country. I'm carrying their pain, their challenges, their hopes, and their dreams with me as well. So yes, do I get a little passionate about these issues when I think people playing games? Oh, yes, I do.
Absolutely. What's the final thing you'd like to say to everyone?
I want everybody to have a happy holiday. SJ, I know it's so hard for some people, but I do want people to try to find a little bit of happiness. If you do celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas. For Kwanzaa will be after that. Happy Hanukkah, whatever you do and celebrate. I hope that people find a little bit of joy. And then let's focus on finding that brighter light in 2021, because we are in a valley moment right now, but the valley moment doesn't last always. We're going to get back to that mountaintop. We got lots of work to do, and we're going to do that work together. I am excited about this race and about this run, and I want people to check me out at ninaturner.com. Yes, visit ninaturner.com.
Our guest today is Glynda Carr, who is the president and CEO of Higher Heights for America. It's the only PAC that's specifically dedicated to electing progressive Black women at a federal, a state level, and also at a mayoral level in different cities around the country. Glynda, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
It has been a long tradition that Black women have been involved in organising, but right now it seems to only be getting recognised because of the incredible turnout in Georgia. Give us a sense of that tradition and how Black women have always played a role. I've heard you describe Black women as being the architects of democracy in this country.
Yeah, so Black women have been the building blocks of winning coalitions in, modern day electoral politics. But we've always put more into this democracy, frankly, than we get back. Black women sat at, the suffrage table. We are now just finished celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And the Black suffragists knew that sitting at that table, that they weren't going to reap the benefits from that movement, but they knew that it was important to have their voice, their leadership as that movement fought for the rights for women. And we've seen that, in milestones across American history. Black women were intricately engaged in the civil rights movement, Roe v. Wade, the women's movement, and have always been obviously, active voters. When you fire up a Black woman, she doesn't go to the polls alone. She brings her house, her block, her church, her sorority, and her union. So when we talk about political leaders here at Higher Heights, we are literally talking about my mother, my best friend, but we're also talking about Black women across the spectrum, the activists, those that are starting organizations, that are leading organizations. They, as you've mentioned, literally are the architects of developing innovative ways to connect with Black women, not only to organize them to the polls, but to organize our voices to advocate on the issues we care about. And more importantly, continuing to invest in ensuring that we have more Black women running for office and more Black women winning and governing across this country at all levels.
Well, we're going to talk about all of that in just a minute, but just bringing it back to Georgia and the very important Senate runoff election, it seems that the work of those organizers as Black women who are out in the communities has now been made even harder, with reports coming out this week of polling stations closed. All of this during a pandemic, when Black women and people of colour have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so take us through some of the strategies that we saw ahead of the presidential election that we're seeing being replicated in the Senate runoff, and the barriers that are continuously being put up in front of those Black women who are organising the Get Out to Vote campaigns.
Yeah. Georgia is just an example of the organizing strategies that have been happening across the country. Georgia, didn't wake up overnight and have made these strides and gains. It's not only just the Stacey Abrams and the LaTosha Browns of the world, but Georgia has amazing grassroots, led organizers across the state. And so the work is to duplicate the successes from the 2020 general election, and frankly, learn from the lessons learned. And what you obviously saw from exit polling and much of the reporting is that Black women voted early in the general election across this country, and particularly in Georgia, and we voted by mail. And so the work of the organizers in Georgia, and like I said, the everyday Black women, is actually activating their network And one, ensuring that we are combating disinformation. So in addition to seeing names dropped from the voter rolls, poll sites being closed, you also are seeing a disinformation campaign targeted towards Black voters, and particularly Black women, with trying to confuse around the dates. So it is important that we talk about that we are living now in a modern day election system. It is about January 5th being the end of voting, and that we have from when the early vote opens, and when in theory, Georgia is already voting. They're receiving their absentee ballots, and they're preparing to vote. And so we need to ensure that we are protecting every voter who is eligible to vote in this upcoming election cycle, and that we are giving the right information and use Georgia as the blueprint. We should not be rolling back voting rights in 2021. In fact, we should be expanding voting rights. We saw in this election cycle a record number of Americans voting, and that's both Republicans and Democrats. And for me, this should not be a partisan issue, but it is. The America that we want to believe in is that we all have the right to vote, and that we should have access to the voting booth without obstacles and barriers.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think there's so much attention that's rightly given to the incredible work of activists, as we mentioned, some of those names, folks in the state of Georgia. But we also need to have the same conversations about why it is so hard and why that activism is so necessary, and the ongoing barriers being placed in front of voters.
Absolutely. It is at the end of the day, there's two things. I've always said you can't harness power you don't know you have. And Americans have, many of us have stepped into our power knowing that we decide elections, particularly Black women. Like, we are the deciding voting bloc in elections on the national level and on a local level. And so that threatens people, the power that women and women of color and Black women have, that's threatening. And so when people feel threatening, they then create defense mechanisms. And in this case, defense mechanism is the rollback of our rights. And so this is, phase 3 of our ability to not only protect the voting rights as we move into the next legislative cycle. And so we need Americans to talk to your local elected officials. Many of our election laws are local, and continue to lobby and advocate on behalf of expanding and protecting the Voting Rights Act in Washington. We all have a role to play. And so everybody is a political leader. And so we need people to activate and be in community. At the end of the day, democracy doesn't begin and end on election day. So oftentimes we treat voting as I vote and we elect leaders. So we need voters to be 365 day a year active citizens. And so our work with Higher Heights is ensuring that Black women's voices are heard, not only organizing to the polls, our voices are heard as candidates, but frankly, that we are going to continue to organize Black women across this country to ensure that our next election cycle is a better election cycle for all Americans.
Well, let's talk about representation, because that's a huge part of the work that you're doing at Higher Heights. And of course, you have that beautiful picture of Shirley Chisholm just behind you there, the first Black woman elected to Congress. Well, right now, we mentioned the 2 Senate seats at play in the Georgia runoff elections. But of course, there is now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris and that Senate seat. Take us through what's really at stake for Black women and representation when it comes to the Senate.
Yeah, so we celebrate the gains that we've made in women's representation over the last couple of election cycles, right? So in 2018, we saw a record number of women run for office. And in fact, we elected a record number of Black women to serve in Congress. That was the 50th anniversary of Shirley Chisholm being elected to that body. We also celebrate going into the 2020 election cycle when we saw a record number of women run for president. And then clearly we are celebrating the historic election of Kamala Harris as the vice president, making her the first woman of color, and Black woman to serve in that role. But we also at the same time are seeing where there is a severe lack of representation, and that is the U.S. Senate. There's currently only 25 women serving in the U.S. Senate. Black women are over 50% of the population. And we've only elected 2 Black women to ever serve in that body. Carol Moseley Braun in 1992, and Kamala Harris in 2016 that's a 24-year gap between elections. And so when she is sworn into office, Kamala Harris, without an appointment of an open seat, which currently is her seat in California, there will be no Black woman representing not only the state of California, but this country. And that being said, it is important that, this appointment is a woman. We are calling for it to be a Black woman. It is the decision of the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. But, not appointing a woman, and particularly a woman of color, will literally set back our political representation as women to almost a decade behind. So we can't make strides forward and at the same point have steps back. Now, someone would say, this might be your follow-up question, well, shouldn't it be the most qualified person that is appointed? There is a large bench of women of color, and Black women in California that could step in that role. In fact, Congresswoman Barbara Lee or Congresswoman Karen Bass are uniquely positioned to step into the upper house as being strong progressive leaders in the United House of Representatives, that they will serve that country, serve that state in this country in a way that continues the legacy of Kamala Harris. And guess what? They happen to be women and Black women.
Take us through how important it is that Black women are recognized for the organizing when it comes to political campaigns, but then that needs to then be translated into representation in leadership positions and really be given a seat at the table.
So, as you mentioned, representation matters. When we have diverse decision-making tables, they make better decisions. And so it can't be, oh, we've elected a Black woman as a vice president. She's going to be, she's going to be the leader in a representation of Black women at all, for the entire administration and entire government. It is the work that we need to do, ensure that there are diverse voices sitting at every table. And so that letter, in fact, actually had 1,000 prominent Black women sign it. And for many of the women in that network, we believe that, we're demanding our return on our voting investment. And so that is in the form of policies that directly impact Black women, our families, our communities, but it also is about ensuring that we have seats at decision-making tables. And so we are, are holding President-elect Joe Biden, who has said that he wants to have an administration that looks like America. And so we are advocating to ensure that we are going to see Black women at senior level roles across the administration as staffers and as cabinet members. In fact, like yesterday, President-elect Biden tapped Marcia Fudge to be the Secretary of HUD. So we celebrate that, but we continue to ensure that we want to see representation across that administration.
That part of that will also be recognizing the issues that are impacting all these different communities. And I know that Higher Heights for America, you had a survey out to really get to a glimpse of what those issues that are impacting Black women and their communities are. Give us a sense of what you heard. What are the issues that we need to be talking about so we can stop focusing on maybe some of the political divisions and really focus on the issues that are so important?
Yeah. So what we found is Black women want what our neighbors want, right? We want economically thriving, educated, healthy, and safe communities. And when you broaden the, what the vision of our communities and our nations, we will find commonalities. Now, within that commonality, Black women are very clear. We've been consistently talking to Black women online and on phone through surveys and polling, and Black women are certainly concerned about COVID-19 as being their top issue that they care about, both across the country. And frankly, we've just, spent some time talking to Black women in Georgia, and their top issue is coronavirus and the recovery. We are concerned about the economy. Black women are overwhelmingly essential workers. Many Black women did not have the luxury to be able to quarantine. They were those who kept the workers that kept this country moving forward. And racism is at the top of Black women voters' minds. What do we need to do to ensure that we are building an America that is willing to have a conversation about racism? Because when you talk about racism, talk about racism, it is what is uniquely tied to many of the policies that we're looking to move forward that has been blocked.
Well, as we do go forward, as you said, we need to look beyond this election and look at the fundamental building blocks of our election process so that the decisions being made now will help improve elections going forward. So as Higher Heights for America wants to see more Black women, progressive Black women elected into office, how can people find out more about your organization? And also, what are your thoughts for people who now need to have that in mind as they cast their own ballots, whether or not they are Black women themselves, but why we all need to be conscious of this and conscious of representation? How can we find out more about your work, and what are some of those final thoughts you'd like to leave people with?
Great. Well, Higher Heights is the political home for Black women, a place for us to be informed, engage, and to take action. And so as we today reflect about the lessons learned from 2020, we continue to build a bigger house that is inclusive of Black women. We are not a political monolith, that we want to be the place where Black women explores the political possibilities of Black women. And that can be from, registering to vote, organizing those to vote, voting, to those that are interested in running for office. And so if you're interested in investing in the next generation of Black women political leaders, it is about engaging with Higher Heights work. And you can find us at higherheightsforamerica.org. And there's a variety of ways of being in community, variety of ways to be supportive of our elected leaders. We've just launched our Chisholm 2020 list. So if you want to know who are some amazing elected women across this country, visit our website and meet the list of 20 women who are leading in the legacy of Shirley Chisholm and Embossed. And if you're thinking about running for office, or an amazing Black woman who should be running for office, we need to go ahead and prepare her to step out. And as Shirley Chisholm would say, step off the sidelines and help us make progress.
Today, we speak with a listening expert, Dr. Graham Bodie, who is a listening educator and a consultant. He's also with the Listen First project. Welcome to the show, Graham.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, how can better listening and teaching listening techniques actually heal some of the social divisions that we're seeing right now? Because it does seem that the country's at a critical point. We're seeing some of these divisions play out in violent ways on the streets, with some of the protests and some of the fans, some of the flames of those protests being fanned by the highest office in the country. So it seems that, well, can listening actually help when we're seeing that extreme manifestation of some of these divisions? I mean, what is the connection between the two?
Yeah, I mean, you speak to an interesting point. I mean, it's clear that polarization has pierced our social fabric. Over 75% of Americans think it's a problem, and it's not just a problem in this country, it's a problem that is global. Polarization in all its forms, and then underlying ills like loneliness and sort of people's felt need to belong and suicidal ideation. All of these things are a function really of our need for relationships and for connection. Clearly over the past decade as well, we've moved from just disagreeing and distrusting each other to disliking and despising those who see the world differently. It's partisan from a political standpoint, where Democrats and Republicans, 15% of Republicans and 20% of Democrats think that the country would be better if a large number of their opposing partisans and the public just died. So yes, it's gotten nasty. And as well as from a small p political standpoint, it's not just Democrats versus Republicans, but we have all kinds of divides. We have urban and rural divides, we have racial divides, we have gender divides, we have socioeconomic divides. And so we're trying to sort of stress the importance that an event like COVID that should have created national, if not global, cohesion, right? In fact, tore us further apart. And so, I mean, your question about what can listening really do is an important one. And so I think what we got to first realize is change starts with us, with me as an individual, understanding that I don't have all of the answers to my own problems, much less to the problems of the person who sits across the Zoom meeting or across the street or across the country from me. That I don't really know anything about the person that is across the street, much less who is across the country from me. And I think we would go a long way to being humble and realizing that if we were to open our ears and therefore open our hearts to those individuals who look and think and act and believe differently from us, then how much more could we do as a country united and together than we could trying to demean and demoralize each other.
So what do you talk about when you're teaching listening skills?
Yeah, I would say we have two ears, and so we absolutely have the capacity for the physiological components of hearing, just like we have two legs and we have the physiological capability for walking and running, or two arms and have the physiological capability for swimming or hugging. But I can't run a sub 5-minute mile. I can't run a sub 3-hour marathon because I haven't actually trained my body to be able to do that, right? And so listening is a deeper form of connection and communication than is hearing. Hearing, the physiological sort of elements that involve not just the ears, but the entire body, in fact. And listening is a deeper sort of, first of all, sort of attitudinal or motivational skill. That's something that you have to come to the table wanting to do in certain ways. Second of all, it's a behavioral skill. It involves lots of different behaviors, from behaviors that you might hear me speak to behaviors that I might do with my body. And then it's this complex set of cognitive skills, those things like memory and retention and attention that I do in my brain that you can't, lift my head and see, but actually lots of different things are going on in my cognitive system. And so very much like the muscles in my legs that I have to work out in order to run a certain sort of distance at a certain pace, I've got to exercise those muscles that are involved with listening, not only my attitudinal muscles, but my behavioral muscles and my cognitive muscles in order to do it well.
So what are some of the tips that you give when you're doing workshops, the education that you do, and particularly with the Listen First project, the National Conversation Project, for people, say, in families or communities where they're experiencing real division and some of that nuance that you mentioned earlier, instead of just disagreeing with somebody, there's a visceral hatred very often, and people feel very much under attack because of the political partisanship and divisions that we're seeing. So what are some of the tips that you give to just start that conversation with effective listening with a view to bridging some of those divides?
And some of my favorite are things like be curious, not furious, which comes from an organization known as Living Room Conversations. So this notion that you ought to come with an open mind, ready to learn and grow. Part of the beauty of meeting new people and having conversations is to expand our horizons. And like we visit new places to gain new experiences and we read new books to spark learning, we want you to think about conversations as a bit of both, and come with a mindset expressed by Bill Nye, which is everyone you will ever meet knows something that you don't. So this ability to be curious first and foremost, to look at the other person as the expert of themselves and their experience. And another organization that we work with called the William Winter Institute has a very similar notion, which is turn to wonder. That when you find yourself viscerally reacting to something that someone says, when you find yourself starting to internally disagree or externally wanting to give your opinion or give your piece of advice, to first turn to wonder and ask yourself, I wonder what brought this person to this belief. I wonder what life experiences have shaped this individual to allow this individual to hold a position that doesn't sound like mine on its surface. And I think if you really dive into what brought that person to that opinion, the first thing that you would find is that it's valid and legitimate from their worldview to hold that opinion. And the second thing that you would find is that you likely don't disagree as much with them and their opinion as you think you do initially. There's an effect in the literature called the contrast effect, that when we hear someone's opinion, the first thing that we do is we compare it to our current opinion. And if it sounds dissimilar, then we contrast their opinion and make it sound in our mind a lot more different from our initial opinion than it actually is. And that happens a lot, especially if we hear that opinion from somebody that we label as the other, as if we are Republican, they are a Democrat. If we are conservative, they are progressive. If I am male, they are female. Whatever that difference is, when we see someone as different from us, as an other, as a them and not an us, we're going to do that even more. And so we really have to sort of come in with the mindset that I can learn something from this person, that I want to be curious not only about their position, but about them and their experiences, and that I might turn to wonder not only about their position, but about them as an individual.
It seems that the heart of what you're saying there as well is that we also have to have the attitude that we're not in communication, interaction to change somebody's mind, to win them over to our side, that in fact we're there to maybe learn from them, and hopefully they would learn from us. I mean, because so much of the communication these days is combative. You know, we're trying to win an argument.
If you go into every conversation thinking you're going to change someone's mind, you're going to be vastly disappointed. Because if you think about yourself, how many times have you drastically changed your opinion after a single conversation, right? Now, you might have changed your mind to, go for a black coffee as opposed to a latte, or to go for 2% milk as opposed to whole milk, or some very small decision that doesn't really change the course of your life or fundamentally change who you see yourself as being in your identity. Most of the beliefs that we want to change in other people are beliefs that shape who we are and who we want to be seen by other people. And if our beliefs are in any way tied to our identity, by changing my beliefs, I'm changing who I am. And it's really uncomfortable to be told that we ought to be changing who we are. What's a lot more palatable to most people is to accept me for who I am, not only all of my good qualities, but potentially my weaknesses and my bad qualities. And so listening fundamentally is about connecting and relating with people, not necessarily ignoring, but clearly not putting so much pressure and emphasis on positions, but listening to the person as opposed to listening to their position.
Let's talk about social media, because how we communicate has fundamentally changed because of social media. So much of our communication is actually happening digitally. But if you add to that how people are getting information or misinformation, so much of that is happening on social media, and we're siloed into these, funnels of information coming our way. We're rarely exposed maybe to information that might contradict some of our own perceptions. So talk about how social media has complicated all of this and maybe made it more challenging to be more effective listeners.
Yeah, I think the promise of social media, the promise of the Facebooks and the Twitters and the Instagrams and so forth of the world, it was connection when you couldn't be, face to face. And unfortunately, they haven't lived up to that promise, because what they've done through, intentional as well as unintentional means is they've formed these echo chambers where we are even more siloed within our own media outlets. We're more siloed and listening to and paying attention to people who look and act and believe like us. And so the challenge of social media is to find those people and those organizations and those sources that are outside of our comfort zone, to have conversations with people that we, normally wouldn't have. And that's the beauty of social media, is you can do that. You can find all kinds of people who believe all kinds of things that are all kinds of quote unquote crazy from my own perspective. And yet, how often do we intentionally seek out those individuals and seek out those sources and double check, right, what this source or that source said against something that might take a different perspective? And so, and added to that, you have the anonymity of social media, where you can feel like, you're sitting behind a computer screen and you're not face to face with somebody, so you can fire off a mean, demeaning, demoralizing comment and not think twice about it. You would never go knock on someone's door and say the things that you post on Facebook, right, for many of us. And so the question is the person you are on social media the kind of person you want to be in real life? And if the answer is no, then maybe modify your behavior on social media a little bit to more match the kind of person that you would want to be in your everyday life.
Well, Dr. Graham Bodie with the Listen First project, thank you so much for being with us today on Free Speech TV.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to Democracy on the Brink. On behalf of this glorious team on this show, I want to wish you a blessed holiday season and a happy new year. 2020 has been very challenging, but it still left us all very hopeful and very excited about what's to come in the new year. 2021 presents some exciting opportunities for us. What will happen in Georgia in the Senate race? We don't know, but we'll talk about it here. And what about the presidential team, this new Biden-Harris team? What will they do? How will they govern? We'll be talking about that and more here on Democracy on the Brink. Until next year, have a blessed holy season and a happy, glorious new year.